on any large ones before.
Yeah. All right. How exciting. Seeing all sorts of Barbara. Hello. How are things? There's Carl and Candy. Um, this is what a terrific group we've got tonight. I see Mrs. Mayor. I see that Woodside, California is well represented with my friend Dick. Ed, thanks for your email today from North Carolina. I tortured Ed by sending him Fire and Brimstone, which I'm sure many of you have read. Terrific book about the Butte mining disaster by Michael Punk. So watch out. Books might be coming your way. Terrific to get such a big group. It'll take us just a minute to get gathered, and then I will welcome our remarkable guest tonight, Dr. Sally Thompson, who's going to share what I know will be an engaging hour. So fun to see people joining in. Marshall and Elaine from Helena and Mark from Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you for continuing to support this kind of programming with the Glacier Conservancy. It's great. I see Emma from Iowa City and Stacy from San Carlos and Sarah from Missoula, which is where Sally is joining us tonight, which is great. So again, thanks everybody. I see Linda Adams from Port Washington, New York. Thank you for popping on again tonight. What a great crowd to be able to welcome an author who really means a lot to the work that we do at the Conservancy and in the park, to remind us that the lands that we work on, this shared partnership of yours and mine to protect this special place, is really a stewardship that has come over the ages, that what we know as Glacier has been sacred land to others for a lot longer than it has been, of course, a national park for us. And so it's just a terrific treat to share this book with each other and to share some time with Sally. So it's kind of fun to tell folks who is here. It's kind of fun to kind of add up the states and things. So if you get a chance, feel free to use the notepad. Let us know where you're coming in from, and also, or the chat box, I guess I should say. Also, we use the chat box for questions, but don't feel limited to that. Feel free to just take yourself off mute and chime in. I know that Carl and Candy have some great answers to the discussion question that we raised about what stories piqued your interest. So that'll be terrific to get from people some idea of the stories that from the book that piqued your interest. So without further ado, Sally Thompson, thank you very much for joining us tonight from Missoula.
Really happy to be here and experience this kind of forum. I know a lot of you probably have been doing Zooming all year, but I have kind of avoided it. So I'm a newbie, and I look forward to seeing if I can see more people and get a sense of who's out there. And I wish I could hear what is meaningful, and maybe I'll get that teased out a little bit tonight. I'd love to hear, I don't hear from people very often about the book, and so it'd be great to get some feedback.
Yeah, it's Sally, as you know from reading the book, Sally is a PhD doctor, got her PhD from the University of Colorado Boulder, taught at the University of Montana. There are some other stories. If we have some time, we're going to talk about the Dalai Lama and an extraordinary opportunity Sally had in 2014. But anthropology is Sally's field of expertise and study. I just wanted to start, Sally, just kind of by asking you about, what keeps bringing, how do you find yourself coming back to this topic?
The topic of
Indigenous people, that you talk about this kind of this drive you have to dig further into these kind of historical, anthropological kind of stories about place, and particularly the place that we now call Glacier.
Well, I'll briefly say that your board member, Jermaine White, many years ago, I call this my bitterest conversation. She and I gave a talk each of us had been invited to give a talk during Archaeology Week, and we drove down together. We were acquaintances. We drove to Stevensville together to give this talk, and I was talking on the prehistory of the Bitterroot Valley. This was in the 80s, I think, maybe early 90s. No, I think 80s. And Germaine was speaking on Salish history in the Bitterroot Valley. And she was the only one of the two of us astute enough to realize we were talking about the same thing. And when we were driving home, I was driving, she said, I have something very difficult to say to you. Okay, go for it. She says, I find what you do for a living to be extremely offensive. So she didn't say I was offensive. She said what I did for a living. And at that time I was an archaeologist. And so we had a very difficult, very crucial conversation on the drive home once I regained my ability to breathe and listen. It was kind of horrifying at first. I was thinking about all the money spent on my education and all she's saying. Anyway, she helped me understand the spiritual nature of their reality, that in this totally physical material plane doesn't exist. And I guess that's what really I have been learning more and more about for the subsequent decades. And it's endless. I'll think I've learned a lot, like working on this book, and that, we finished the book really about 7 years ago, and 6 years ago, I guess. And then the layers just keep deepening. So hopefully we'll visit more about that through the course of this hour.
Yeah, that's super interesting. You just have to keep trying, right? We're going to get things. We're going to get things wrong. There are things we don't know. There are experiences that we don't have. And to be open to that conversation, it takes courage on both sides, right? For her to have it and for you to accept it in a way that isn't fragile and reactive. So, and that's all we can do as humans, right? Is to just keep learning from each other. And we're delighted to have the opportunity to learn from you tonight. And you've been kind enough, Sally, to put together a little presentation for us. So I want to, without further ado, kind of hand the screen over to you and have us share that with us. And then you've also been kind enough to select a reading that we'll do afterwards, and then we'll open it up for conversation. And in the meantime, if people think of questions during the presentation, feel free to, again, shout out if you want, or also just put it in the chat. We already have a vibrant chat going on, 28 pieces already in there. Greetings from New Jersey and Arizona and Colorado and Maine, so and Canada. So you've gone international, Sally.
Right.
Take it away.
Well, when Doug first contacted me, I said, well, is there something in particular that you'd like me to focus on? And he just said, whatever you find yourself coming back to. And so I've given that quite a bit of thought. And there are three things, just to begin with, that I think continue to keep giving information. So the first is the seasonal round. I was talking to a friend about this, and when I asked her about the book, she said, well, just to even be aware that the flow of seasons is something we participate in all the time, but many of us don't even know it. We're not thinking about it. So that's such a rich way to reorient. And if we haven't even thought about it, then we remain unaware. So I hope that people's experience continues to deepen just from thinking about that more. And then the second thing is the place names. And the published version of this book a lot of the place name information got slimmed down to an appendix at the end, but every place has a story. I mean, the way that place name came to be is a story of people, and a story that keeps reaffirming who those people are together and in relationship to that place. And that's also just such an important thing to think about. Who are we based on our place names and our stories? And then the third thing is the resilience. of people who no longer have, the freedom to go in and out of Glacier as they once did and have lost so much, to still have such clarity about what matters. And so those are the three things from the book that I hope serve as seeds for people. And thinking beyond Glacier Park. So wherever you are, and even thinking about right now, it's almost the equinox. And for those of us this far north, springtime is such an important time and a time of celebration. And for us in Western Montana, at least in my family's life, we look forward to bluebirds and buttercups and bitterroot greens emerging and the song of a meadowlark. And, I'd wonder about all of you and what comes to mind, what you feel joy at seeing the return of. And as you even think of it right now, kind of check in with what that does to you. I find myself feeling more vital and hopeful when I think about this. And the sighting of a first bluebird is just, oh, look, they're so magnificent. And just the reassurance, they're back. So recently, just last week, I woke up from a very deep sleep and I got up and I thought to myself, what day is this? And I didn't know. And I felt physically dizzy, literally dizzy. I had to kind of hold my hand against the wall, and I'm a steady person on my feet. It was an unusual experience. And it just made me think about the world where you don't need a calendar to tell you the day of this 7-day week. You just trust where you are in the flow of things. And that's so much of what this book is about. Seeking a deeper experience with the world that supports us. And underlying all of that, the seasonal reality, the recurrence of life, the return of the bluebirds, it's all about relationships. And that's a core to a way of knowing. And, American society and through a certain lens looks pretty blind to the living world that supports us. So we'll return to this as we go on. On a walk with a friend recently, she asked me, what's the Salish name for the Clark Fork River? And I had to explain how that's a Western concept. It's a European mind concept. Like, where do you decide? You have to step back and be abstract about it to be able to say, this is the river and here's its name. And, places all along the rivers and certain tributaries because of something that happened there or something like Flint Creek, gets its name from, it was called the Arrowstone River by Salish and Ponderay and probably others that traveled through here because of a source of chert up the Flint Creek Valley. And so again, there's a story behind all these names and they aren't about hydrology. So again, English speakers and thinkers, we're person, place, thing based, noun based language. And all Indigenous languages that I am aware of worldwide are verb based. And things are moving, nothing is static, things are related to each other. And it both reflects and creates an interconnected world. And we have to struggle. The most common thing that I've heard through the years from Native people is always, I wish I could tell you this in my own language. And it's because it truly can't be translated. The stories they carry and all of that entails about a different way of knowing this world we occupy. So that, place name, the losses of these place names and the different conceptualizing of these places is a huge subject, and one that is really pertinent in the park, especially the place called Apgar, or the place where they dance. And I know that you've read that story. The subject of the story, the ritual of storytelling in a seasonal way, always the same time of year you would be reciting what your history is, who you are, and it would be told in song and rhyme, so you don't change the words, and people hear it over and over again all their lives, and with each telling, as they grow and mature, they hear it more deeply. And it reminds them over and over of who they are and where they've come from. And that is the other thing I've heard more than that I hear whenever I'm in conversation with a Native person. It's, you got to know who you are and where you come from. And so that was so built into their way of being traditionally and continuing. And it's very much basic to their resilience. So that's the background. And I'm going to turn on the slides now. Unless, do you want to open this up for something at this moment or move on to the slides?
So we got a kind of a great question on the chat that I just thought I'd maybe is a good bridge. This is from Barbara Holt, who says, I found the book to be so beautifully written, touched me on so many levels, and wondering how I can better connect to the world around me and to other beings around me.
Being outside as much as you can and taking it in, just thinking about start with spring and receiving. I think maybe we're always trying to be in charge. Maybe I'm speaking for more than myself, but the way we're raised, we've got an agenda. We're going to, even our exercise, got this much time. I'm going to walk or run this far, and I'm going to take this hike. I'm going to get to this place. I'm going to do it in such and such a time. Or, now so many people running wilderness trails and even bikes, the controversy about bikes and speed. So I'd say slow down, breathe, and allow the world to inform you.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, and this might be just kind of a fun time, I think you raised an interesting, really super interesting thought question about, what are people right now thinking about the return of, as I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to move out of this shadow and sun that's in my screen. One of the things is I love the fact that it's lighter later. For me, that is a talisman of I just feel more vibrant. So maybe we'll just take a couple of minutes and see if people would be willing to unmute themselves and just throw in a couple of, what are the things that are your talismans? It doesn't have to be for spring, but that kind of are things that mark for you the changing of seasons. Don't be shy. You're not a shy group.
The hummingbirds.
For me,
when we get to come back to
I'm sorry.
Montana.
Sheila says, when you get to come back to Montana.
Yes.
I double that.
Yeah.
Shelley agrees. Candy?
Yeah, the birds. We live very close to Glacier National Park. We're seeing a lot more bird activity, a lot of geese, and just the songs that we're hearing. Just we sit on our front porch and close our eyes and just listen to all the different birds. They're just celebrating the longer days, like you said, Doug. We too love the sun coming from Southern California. It was tough to be without so much sun this winter, but now that it's here, it's just celebration, and it's not just us celebrating it, it's birds. It's like they're all coming alive again, and they're coming back.
We still want to see a bear. That hasn't happened yet, but I guess they're out now.
There you
Those
go.
birds are coming from Louisiana.
What was that?
A lot of those birds are coming from
Oh.
Louisiana.
Oh,
Right.
Wow.
And in the fall, that's one of the things that I look for and listen for, the geese when they're coming back.
Nice.
Yeah.
Linda?
Long day.
For me, in addition to everything that has been mentioned, it's being warmer. So I have a question. The one reason I'm not as sad about living in Montana, because I love, that's where I come from and that's my love. But at least I'm warmer more months of the year because I don't live there anymore. So how is the warmth right now in northwestern Montana?
It's pretty good. It's getting to be shorts weather. I think it was 52 or something today.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm coming home. Thank
We'll
you.
take it. Well, that's great. Thanks, people, for sharing that. I see we've been joined by one of our earlier book club authors, Hugh Grinnell. Thanks so much, Hugh, for joining us from Arizona. That's just terrific. And with that, Sally, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and kind of walk us through some slides, that'd be great.
I did want to say to Barbara, thank you so much for your kind words about the book. Okay, now we practiced this and I'm hoping this is going to do it.
Well, in all the confusion of this large crowd, perhaps something, oh, there we go. You got it.
Whoops. Let's see. Okay, now.
And if people who are watching are finding that your little thing of tiles is in the way, you can kind of drag that around using the black space up in the top of your tiles and put it in a more convenient spot. And if you put it on the far right, it'll go down to the bottom.
Okay, can everybody see this screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. So I thought I'd start by just giving a little bit more background about how the book came about. And some of you probably know Jack Potter. Actually, are Jack and Rachel on tonight? So hi, guys. So Jack, when he was the head of cultural and natural resources for the park, in anticipation of the centennial, decided that there should be a book that was about the native people that had been part of the park prior to its formation, and a commitment to people understanding it wasn't an empty wilderness with lacking people. And so I had the good fortune, really great good fortune, to get to do this book. So that was the beginning, and that was, I believe, it might have been 2007 or 8. Yeah, at least 8. I mean, yeah, it might have been earlier. So the book, as originally conceptualized, was going to be, kind of typical anthropologist book, where I would go through all of the written material, giving the archaeological background and the ethnographies and historical studies, and consult with tribes to get this written. And that was what we set out to do. So the tribes in relation to the crown of the continent are the two that are in the book. And then the Ponderay and Salish have a strong history with the park, but it wasn't as much part of the traditional territory as for the Kootenai and Blackfeet. And also the Stoney people up, First Nations up north of the Tunaha, and the Blackfeet Confederacy groups also use the north end of the park quite a bit. But for a number of reasons, it made most sense to us to really focus on the Kootenai and Blackfeet because of their deep and long and rich history, and their literally, that's part of their origin stories, the landscape of the park. I'm missing my button for, okay. So there's Glacier highlighted a little bit to show the areas. So I started doing the cultural consultation work, and the Kootenai Culture Committee, I fortunately had a friend there who gave me an introduction, because the Kootenays had a long history of not really working with anthropologists if they could help it, and especially anybody with an archaeological background. So it was in a way a hostile environment, and I don't mind saying that, and they would laugh with me about it now. But when they realized how people generally associate the park with Blackfeet, and that's very much a historical phenomenon, as I address in the book, they thought it was time to correct history a little bit and let people know what a rich history they had there as well. So Vernon Finley, who's now head of the Culture Committee, was in charge of the language program at the time, and he was assigned to kind of work with me. And then Nada Left Hand is the one where we really did word by word checking of what I was getting on paper. So I very much appreciate the difficult and long effort it was to try to write a book in a collaborative sense like this. So anyway, before we ever got to that point, we held a gathering of elders, and especially those who spoke the language, among all the bands, the Tunaha and Kootenays. And we had an incredible showing. It was at Yellow Bay on Flathead Lake, which was a traditional site. And the fellow on the right-hand side of this panel, whose name was Leo Williams, he was coming, and because he was coming, pretty much everyone wanted to come, because he was the kind of most revered storyteller, original speaker. I asked him during this event where he grew up, or where he was born, and he said they would say on the back of a horse. I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, my parents were still living like they always had." This was in the 1930s, because so they were still riding on horses and moving their teepee but instead of to traditional camp areas, they were doing it to settlers' locations to help out on their ranches. That's how his parents adapted, but he grew up, in a lot of ways like the old time. And so people came to hear him speak. And when they started this panel, he spoke Kootenai for a long time. And when he finished, I asked the man next to me what he had said. And he said, he started out by saying, I'm here to speak my own language. And if anyone asks me to speak English, I'm going to get up and walk out that door. So I'm glad he had a respectful audience, and no one interrupted, and no one asked for him to translate what had been said. But people built on it, and a lot of stories and a lot of thinking together about how to proceed happened at that gathering. And then a similar, well, very different, but a gathering to help shape the book and how we would do this with two different tribes happened outside of Browning. Some of you might know Darnell Rides at the Door on the right there. And she invited traditional people, bundle holders from all over the reservation to join us. And they put up their painted lodge to make it an official, important day. There was a feast involved, and very, very much honoring that some important work was going to be done for their people. And it was really interesting, because what came about during this event was an agreement really between both the Kootenays and the Blackfeet that had happened so completely independent process, but they came up with the same idea. They each really resisted the idea of starting out with archaeology and telling a linear story, right? And also a story interpreted through that very kind of science-based linear lens that didn't seem to tell their story. And they also didn't want us to focus on the troubles and the warfare, because so many people write books about that. And they thought what matters for us is none of that. So here was our original project. redlined, and instead the agreement was to focus on the songs and the stories, the relationships that hold people together in their homeland right there. And that's what mattered. And I love that it was Gigi Kipp from Blackfeet and Vernon Finley from Kootenai Community really articulated this, and we all embraced the idea, and it really set us a clear job then, to really focus on relationships. And that means so much more than I realized when we started, and I'm still learning about that. So my job then, reconstructed, would be to go ahead and review the documents, but ignore archaeology, really focus on the century before the park, when there's still good oral history and some observer written history, good interviews with elders that happened mostly in the 1920s and 30s. So a great record from that. Maps, archaeological evidence, place names, and then like the boundary surveys and good historical documents with observations. So, and then ongoing conversations with the elders. So I found so many fascinating things in the process, and just love this picture. Schultz spent 2 weeks with primarily this group of men, learning about those place names, and it had pretty much been forgotten, this information, and there's a map and everything that goes with it. And then on the Blackfeet side, all the, again, a lot of place name information being recorded by McClintock and Schultz in those days. But what I realized is Paul David in the previous picture from Kootenai, from the Tobacco Plains Kootenays, and then Mad Wolf, and so many others. I was interviewing, the people I was working with were their grandchildren. And so here we are, this, series of anthropologists and historians and others recording these stories. And then in the past, always the white person doing it, putting their name on the book, right? And something just struck me that this is not my book. I am recording, I'm editing, I'm recording, I'm organizing, but these are not my stories. And so I went back to the committees and just said, we need to figure out a different way to put this book together. So it was decided that the chapters that on the seasonal rounds would become theirs. So I put the words on the page, but like I said, with Nada in particular, and Smokey and Darnell Rides at the Door for the Blackfeet, we went through it together word for word. And there were times when Nada especially would say, I need you to change this phrase. And I would try to go, well, it kind of whatever. And she said, you don't hear how you're not representing us. And this is our chapter. And she said, this now is for our grandchildren and we need to get it right. So subtle things that she would have let go if my name was on the book would have been, one thing, but once their name was on it, I could go ahead and be the editor basically, but she wasn't gonna let me get away with anything that was not correct. So it took a long time. It took years. I went back and forth. I spent a lot of time at Elmo. This is at their cultural center on the west shore of Flathead Lake. And a lot of time going over to Browning and visiting with the committee there and hearing stories. And every time, we'd get going and somebody would remember something, and then that would trigger other people's memories. Oh yeah, my grandpa used to say. And so we kept refining the seasonal round information that we could pull together. So Glacier, it's the same park, but vastly different worlds on so many different scales. And, one is the two sides of the park. So west of the divide, the Pacific climate regime that influences, the much greener landscape, and it's narrower valleys and one range of mountains after another. And on the east side, you enter from the vast plains of the center of the continent. And the prairies just, the landscape has shaped very different people through thousands of years. And when we were ready to put the book together, I wanted to have consistency. Well, people are used to January being the beginning of the year. And so I could see, why don't we do it, like this, the winter solstice as the beginning. So the Kootenai were fine with that because that's the beginning of their year. And the Blackfeet was like, nope. The beginning of our year is springtime. It's when the geese return. It's when we first hear thunder, and we're not going to conform to your needs for consistency. Okay, so I was a slow learner. So I just thought I'd do a quick round highlight of the seasonal rounds of the two tribes. And I apologize that in some cases I don't have credit for the photographs as I should. I apologize, ran out of time. So what I love here and what I've tried to emphasize is the deep intelligence in the names of the moons, and just how totally disconnected January, February, March, they mean nothing, but that they have many different names, and different bands have different names because of course their placement is different, and they might have an event that shifted a name. But those of you who spend time in glacier country throughout the year will recognize a lot. Pull the Packs Up Pass is one of my favorite parts of the book. Learning that story was just unbelievable. So there it is, imagine. And then I love cracks begin to form in the ground, and knowing muddy places along the rivers where that happens, but also Moon of the Red Grass appearing, and this, I found this up Bowman Creek somewhere there, that area, and just thought, oh, this is so perfect with a shed antler and some red appearing in the grasses. And then for the Kootenai, really for both groups, how berries are so important. In earlier times, or if you look at a bookshelf on all the books on Blackfeet, how often hunting, or on any traditional people in the world, hunting is so overemphasized, and what women bring in, anthropologists have been able to quantify that it's steadier food, and it's actually usually more protein on average for the year. But the big haul, or is the big game that the men are bringing in. But anyway, through time, the balance has been thrown off, and the work of men has been emphasized. But when you look at the naming of the moon, you realize how important that, you got to have that fruit, right? So it kept people alive. But fishing really important in the spring too, and the different fish runs, the particular types of fish and methods of fishing was really wonderful to learn about. So the service berries next, and then the intelligence that's built into all of this of the correlations. So the moose were best to take at that time of year when the service berries were ripe. And then with the huckleberries, they just come on, and they're ripening during the night. And you think about those of you who know huckleberries, the smell, you smell them before you see them. It's like, oh, they're ripe. It's such a wonderful time of year. And collecting medicine happened a lot the same. Many of the medicines were ripe around the same time. And the love that elk meat's best when the paintbrush stamen tastes sweet. How they figured that out, right? And that often right after the first frost is when the choke cherries are ready. And then autumn leaves in fall, and then whitefish fishing, big in the Kootenai world. And then first prayers, and the beginning and going back. And I love the sun goes under. So realizing it's that dark time of beginning and back to the place where they dance. So the Louisiana comment of now the geese back in this area, and as they are now, and as Carl and Candy mentioned, so many this year, and it does seem to be true. I also love the cultural. I know Doug told us how to move our screen so that I'm a little blocked, so I'm not able to read everything on the right side there. But sore eyes in the spring, and that's something I actually don't know more about. Why then more than earlier in the season, but I guess right now, I went skiing yesterday, and had I not had good glasses, I would have ended up snowblind. But this transition time, and as I mentioned, the thunder, the sound of first thunder is really important in Blackfeet world. Well, you know these things. I'm not going to belabor them. That's just Frog Month. Love it. The idea of, when we hear frogs for the first time again, coming out from under the mud or whatever. And then the buffalo flower telling him that that's when the yellow buffalo calves have dropped. I wish I could pronounce all of these. The Blackfeet is a little easier than the Kootenai. At least, we have all the same sounds with the Blackfeet language, but not with Kootenai by any means. I was fortunate to go to a Okan on Badger Creek, and actually saw a weather dancer move a storm. That was that's not in the book, I don't think, is it? Okay, I think it happened after that. Anyway, literally saw a person, a skilled weather dancer move a storm that was coming toward the camp.
That was, I believe, in the book.
Oh, okay. Then again, the berries being so important. And I love, when crows begin to gather up. Turning white moon, referring to the critters that change color. And then I love that these McClintock photos are available and how much they enrich the book. It tells such a story. These intelligent horses, a lot of horses today would never figure out what those horses knew. And then just, the winter was long. I've lumped 3 months there because it was really a time of storytelling and in being together. And that's the overview to remind us of those seasons.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a really very vivid kind of way to think about the differentiation between these things. And I know you have a brief reading for us as well.
Well, I could or couldn't do it. I realized that took a little longer than I had anticipated, and I'd love to hear questions and comments and other insights people have to share.
Yeah, I wanted to point out one thing we talked about a little bit before we brought everybody in, but I think it's important. You had noted that the proceeds to this book go to the Montana Historical Society. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, when the previous editor at the Press contacted me about taking this report I had done for Glacier Park and turning it into the book. We talked about, well, I just started thinking about how could we ever split up proceeds, or, I don't think people make that much off of books to begin with, but how were we going to split it? We have 2 tribal communities, 2, entities, and myself, and it just seemed like, why not let the Historical Society have this for their own programming and to enhance their Native American focus. And they also, I think, kind of like when the tribes realized they were going to have their own names on their chapters and they would do a better job, the Historical Society, when they realized this was their book and the proceeds would benefit their work, they did such an incredible job with the illustrations. I mean, I don't think that they would have gone to such lengths if they weren't going to be the beneficiaries. And I love all these historical images. I think they add as much as the words do, or more. Pictures are worth more, right? So we're delighted. We were all relieved, really, not to have to even deal with it or think about it. And nobody can point fingers and say, oh, they're getting more or whatever. And we're all happy to support the Historical Society.
Yeah, it's a great, anybody who has not been to the Historical Society, which will soon be the Montana Heritage Center, a large construction project, very critical. They do amazing work, and we are proud to partner with them through a project called the Montana Memory Project, where your donations help us support the digitization of records in the archives at Glacier National Park. The archives in the park are underfunded, and let's just say that perhaps not the most state of the art, with no fault of the park. It's just the way of the world. And so we're able to support through your kindness and generosity, the digitization of records, including a lot of the original Heilman photographs and other photographs in the park, to make sure that they don't go by the wayside. I know we've got some questions, Jill. One of the ones I'll launch with, and I'll turn it over to Jill, is I was asked, what's next for you?
Oh, you're asking me.
Yeah. Everybody wants to know when they can get the next book.
Oh, well, I have just finished a manuscript. It's called Worlds We Carry. And it's looking at Indigenous and European ways of knowing the world, following Father de Smet around North America to tell the story.
That's going to be really
cool. I don't have a contract yet, but hopefully within, in about a year, I hope it'll make its way into the world.
Jill, I know we've got a couple of questions in there from folks.
Yeah, we have a few questions I'd love to launch into. Susan asked, how can we learn or experience more from these tribes and their stories, spirit, and culture?
Well, it's a tricky thing, really.
Mm-hmm.
I know, geez, I'm sorry. There are deer in the yard and the dog is not liking it.
You got a lot of dog people on the phone. Don't worry about it.
He's such a little idiot. Okay, I'll give an example. Hang on, I'm going to.
Oh, you're good. So I'll answer the Montana Heritage question. Where is the Montana Heritage Center? So it's in the state capitol complex. So where the Historical Society is now, I believe that's going to be the corner of 6th and Roberts. They are expanding it into 2 entire additional city blocks adjacent to what is currently the Montana Historical Society. So that'll be the Montana Heritage Center. It is funded through, in addition to the bed tax that the legislature passed last year, they raised the bed tax by 1% from 7% to 8%. And so it's tourism dollars that when visitors come and pay the bed tax, that money, part of that money, 1% of it is going to go to help retire the debt on the building of what will be a state-of-the-art heritage center. So again, back to you, Sally.
I have Baxter under control now. So
good. All right, Baxter.
I was going to give an example that the other day I called a Native Hawaiian friend to see if she would have any interest in helping with a large climate change action that is underway, and the group really would like some serious Indigenous participation. And she very thoughtfully responded that she's come to be so clear that her energy needs to stay close to home and to helping restore their own people to their traditions and their foods, and that they best serve the planet by doing that. And I've had that experience a lot. I had an elder at Taos Pueblo tell me he spent more time with me than he had with his grandchildren, and it really was not right. And he wasn't blaming me. I was, we were both involved in work that they shouldn't have had to be doing, but legal issues that they just had to keep addressing. And so I'm going to guess that some of my wisest teachers from that world would say you can best learn by doing what we were talking about earlier, by slowing down, paying attention to the world around you more, and honoring, caretaking it, because that's the essence of what they're modeling.
Mhm. Yeah.
Being respectful.
Mhm. Yeah, and kind of going off of that, could you talk a bit more about the connections tribe have to the spirits embodied in the land and animals and so on?
And the very end that I was going to read, but I just encourage you guys to reread that last section on resilience and the covenant with the Creator, and that commitment to life.
Mhm.
You think about, I was thinking about the plastic bottles that people buy detergent in, that are filling up our landfills, and just every decision is a political one, really. And you just stop and think, what are we doing that we're part of the destruction? What can I do to turn that around
Mhm.
and slow down, and let's get off the spending so much time. I think especially kids just not being able to be out um, in a natural setting. There's so many children in this world. Most of us are obviously nature lovers and are out, or wouldn't be part of this group. And we have that good fortune. And so maybe
Mhm.
seeing it as a responsibility.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe we could take a few more questions and maybe squeeze in that reading if we have time. Someone also asked if you could comment on the difference between archaeology versus the process in the book, and if you could elaborate on why the archaeology approach was offensive.
Well, it was digging into their past with no understanding of it. So Jermaine's example was a friend had come up to me after this presentation and shown me a stone knife that she had found in her garden in the Bitterroot Valley. And I think that's what triggered Jermaine. And she said, that knife might have been placed there for a purpose. And there would have been a spiritual commitment or understanding, or it might have been buried with someone, and in a way that had intention. And so an archaeologist digs that up, no understanding, takes it to a laboratory, analyzes. And I spent a lot of years doing this, so I'm not casting aspersions elsewhere. And just looking at it from a completely disconnected point of view, and only for a certain purpose. We want to understand, how old this is, what the technology was, but it has nothing to do with the living people. We might say that's the intention, to better understand them, but is it? And does it do justice? And so that's what she was calling into question. And the field of archaeology has come a long way since the late 80s, in terms of recognizing that there has to be a better bridge between the two. I ended up writing a little piece on digging for roots in other people's gardens. That I felt like, in a way, we're all, those of us who came from other lands, are kind of orphans here. So maybe we seek a way of belonging that's distorted.
I think it might be fun to turn the tables a little bit. You know, one of the discussion questions we threw out there was, what stories did you, as readers, book lovers, kind of which ones really resonated with you? And so I'm going to call on Carl and Candy first, because they actually answered this question for me. And you can pick the appropriate one of the two that you gave me. But then others, you know, I think it'd be good for Sally. She has expressed an interest in kind of hearing from you. So let's just take a few minutes and maybe kind of feed back to her what resonated for you guys in the book as you read it.
Hi, okay, this is Carl and Candy here. It's on page 168 is the story of Nappy learns to gather bullberries. And we thought this was a really funny story about this Indian that was diving in the water to collect the berries. He thought we're under the water. And then after, I guess, several attempts, he couldn't get them. And so he was resting on shore and looked up, and the berries were up in the trees. He was diving into the reflection of the berries. We just thought that was so funny. And we were kind of wondering, is that really a true story?
Well, Nappy is, you know, both creator and trickster and an example. So like Coyote on the west side, in a way, you know, so given a lot of power to create the world here for humans, but so unlike European mind. Nappy is he makes mistakes, he's got ego issues, he's jealous, he's, you know, got every problem that humans have. So all the stories are going to tell you about that. So it's kind of like Narcissus, I guess. Huh? Is that looking at the reflection in the water in a different way. He's just a lot of foolishness in a way, and then but it's a way to teach children. You don't bullberries because they're sharp thorns. So here's the intelligent way to get them. And you know, what a fun way to raise children with these stories, right?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. We loved your book.
Yeah.
Loved it.
So much.
We're just fascinated with the history, the abundance of history in the park, and just as I wanted to share one quick story. We've been up to 2 Medicine Lake one time, and the minute we got out of the car, I felt an enormous spiritual presence there. I could feel somebody looking over us, and I didn't understand. This was way before. This was what, 2 years ago, way before we read your book. I had no idea the history or the sacred, how sacred of a spot that area was. And when I read your book about, I got goosebumps because I just, to this day, I can still remember the feeling I got when I got out of the car. I told Carly, said, this is a very special place. I could feel it, not knowing anything about the park. So I really appreciate, we both really appreciated your book and helping us get more educated on the history of the park, and really fascinated. We're just so excited to have read your book. We just really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for sharing that personal experience of the power of a place.
It was so powerful.
Such a great, you know, for all of us to realize that sometimes when we've slowed down a little bit, we are receptive because it's all there. We just don't grow up thinking that we, you know, might expect something like that.
Yeah, we just stumbled upon it. We saw the dirt road, took it, and we had no idea where we were going. And we were just out for a day drive, and we had no idea at all of what that area meant. Yeah. I just felt. So yeah, it's nice to learn, to be learning about our backyard.
No, that's a great story. And I know that, you know, especially over this past year, you know, we've been reminded of the power of place, right? And to give us nourishment and healing, and restoration and renewal. You know, the book, Sally does an amazing job of helping remind us of that connection between place and people. And it's something we have to constantly be reminded of. And As is always the case, we ran out of time before we ran out of topics. Now, before anyone leaves, though, Sally has been kind enough to offer to sign book plates for anybody who would like a book plate to put in the signed book plate. So feel free to use the chat feature or email emily@glacier.org. We will send the names and inscriptions to Sally, and she will sign the book plates, return them to us, and we'll get them out to you. So Sally, thank you very much for.
Doug, can I say one last
Of
thing?
course, absolutely.
If people, I don't know if you have a system for this, but if there's a way that participants had questions that didn't get answered or things that you came up with or things you would like to share with me from reading it, if you could forward them to me, Doug, and I would respond.
You bet. That's such a generous offer. We would be absolutely delighted. We didn't quite get to the Dalai Lama story tonight.
Next time.
There is a great Missoulian article about that. And again, it's as we've kind of talked tonight, that those special moments and times where you have, this special sense that something mystical is happening. And I don't know any of us who can step into Glacier without having that feeling. So Sally Thompson, thank you. Thank you to a great group tonight. Thanks so much. In all the confusion, we may have missed a few bits and bytes. I didn't do a very good job of advertising the next book, but I do have it here, Voices of Rivers by Matthew Dickerson. And that's going to be super exciting. We are co-hosting that with Friends of Acadia. So my dear friend, David McDonald, who's the executive director of Friends of Acadia, is inviting his group. This book was written half by the artist in residence, Matthew Dickerson at Glacier, and half by the artist in residence, Matthew Dickerson at Acadia. So it'll be really fun to get a group of kind of cross-fertilization. And I want to introduce you to my friend, David, and the work they do at Acadia. And he wants to introduce his group to us and what we do here in Glacier. So thanks again for a wonderful evening of sharing. Sally, thanks for becoming part of our Glacier family. The awkward part of this is when it ends and we all just kind of go away and then we sit in our room by ourselves. So we apologize for that awkwardness, but we do so with our thanks for all of your support, kindness, and please be well, everyone.
Thank you, Sally.
Yes, thank you all.
Good night.
Thanks,
Night.
everyone. Thanks, Sally.